there's been a change in U.S. history from generation to generation of how much work has an influence in our lives. Back in the 1920s and the 1940s, 1920s Great Depression, 1940s World War II, right? The 1920s Great Depression, you literally had men jumping from skyscrapers because they couldn't provide for their families because they were out of a job. 1940s, you had men doing the exact same thing, committing suicide because they were ineligible for military service. Fast forward to present day, you have a lot of farmers and rural men that have high rates of suicide and depression when they become higher age because they're right around that retirement time. When they get out of that, when they get into retirement, they find out that their identity that they've based their entire life on is gone, and they have to reinvent themselves. That's why we're seeing this high rate of depression and suicide amongst older males, specifically in like rural communities. As time goes on, though, we're finding that these our children and ourselves have less and less resiliency, and that's because as time moves on, technology moves on, and we insulate ourselves from stressors in life, right? There's just less things to worry about because we mold the world to ourselves, and we have more and more technology to make our lives less stressful. So that's a good and a bad thing, right? So we have less stress, but we have less resiliency as well. So ultimately, what I would say is this whole work identity thing that we get wrapped around as protectors that are currently in or were in, I would say know the dangers of having your identity wrapped all into one title. Don't be more than a cop, a carpenter, a firefighter, EMS. You're more than that. Not only are you more than that to your family, your wife, your children, but you're more than that to God, and God calls us to be more than that.
What seems like a big deal now would not have seemed like a big deal back then because men were trained more in resiliency. They had jobs that kind of developed it. Is there like one thing that you recommend to help someone listening today develop resiliency in their life? Because right now it's just, it's a buzzword, really. A lot of people talk about resiliency, but you are a master resiliency trainer for the military. So what's one thing we can all do today to kind of start embracing that more?
Well, it'd be nice if I could narrow it down to one thing. There's so in the Army Master Resiliency Trainer course, there's 14 skills that we're trained in to present to soldiers and how to practice those skills, right? Easiest skill that there is, and then they check the block on it, which is hunt the good stuff, right? So you're looking for the positive things throughout the day, and then right before you go to bed, you want to name off 3 to 5 things that were positive that happened for you, right? You have to realize when you're in a what the Army calls a thinking trap, right? And I think that's a pretty accurate label, actually, to when you're realizing that maybe your thoughts and your actions might not be in line with the consequences of that, like or your emotions, right? That cognitive restructuring, though, is realizing when there is that delta, right, between your actions and your thoughts and the consequence, which would be like your emotions or your behaviors. I would say cognitive restructuring is probably the biggest thing that any one person, protector or just lay person, can do to help themselves build resiliency.
One thing I would mention, being prior service, I came out hopeful. Like I got out of the military hopeful, joyful, like, yes, the best days are ahead of me and I will enter into them, right? This new chapter of my life is going to be amazing. And then I walk into it and I didn't realize that there were a lot of things in the structure of the service that I became dependent on. One part, this, Drew, but like I was in for 10 years and never lined up for a deployment. There was deployments coming and I'd be a month out and then the deployment would get canceled and then kind of go through a new cycle with a new unit, and it just never lined up. And I carried a lot of guilt about that. But what I find is pretty much every man carries guilt about something in their life, right? Yeah. And we see this so often where whether it's a prior service person not hunting the good stuff and finding all the bad stuff and getting aggravated, or, for me, it was really this, this constant comparison to other people's stories. Have you seen that a lot in your life or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the theme or the emotion of shame or guilt is really prevalent amongst our niche of the population, right? The less than the 1% that serves the community, and I think that's because of my theory, I guess, is that it's the type of population or the type of people that are attracted to this type of work. The desire to serve is what drives people, and so with that inherent drive to serve, right, the intrinsic value in that job, comes the other personality traits of always putting ownership on yourself. I'm a big Jocko Willink fan. I'm sure you've heard of him, the Extreme Ownership book. And the downfall of that, though, is that we have a tendency to feel that shame and that guilt for anything that's even out of our control. I'll tell you firsthand. Just like you, I have a familiar feeling with shame and guilt. Perhaps not like military wise, like on the deployment side, because I'm getting ready to go out the door right now. But especially in law enforcement, could I have gotten there quicker? If I had gotten there quicker, could I have potentially changed the outcome of that one call that I had? It's deciding what your values are, and for me, I lowered it down to a clear, concise, one-word answers. And it's a list of 4 things. This is just mine. But in order of precedence and priority, it's God, family, country, community. Whenever I realize I might be straying the course a little bit from maybe identifying myself in one particular job or another over the bigger picture, I always fall back on those values, which for me is God, family, country, community. What is the man that God wants me to be? Am I being a present husband? And then after that, and only after that, can I think about my country, which is where the Army falls in, and then my community, which is where the sheriff's office falls in.
So I think you and I talked about this with like suicide too, because that's really on our heart here at KO, is like you have an increased suicide rate from those getting out of the military, but then also not only is it going up, it's not even people who saw combat most of the time, right? A good majority at least. So that's a pretty interesting statistic, right? And a lot of people go, well, what's wrong with the military that would have caused that? And I don't know, man, I just kind of want to have a discussion with you about that, just see what comes out. But like for me, I don't think it's what's wrong with the service. It's what we allowed the service to answer that it was never meant to answer. Like identity. I'm not a captain anymore. I'm not a Black Hawk pilot anymore. But if someone said, who are you? What do you do? I would say I'm a captain and I'm a Black Hawk pilot.
One of my professors